We are now working on the letters QRST in one-point perspective. As usual, we start with our horizon line, where I like to line up my ruler on the edge of the paper, and our vanishing point. Then we create our box to fit our letters inside. One thing to remember is we want to keep those letters approximately the same in size. For the Q, I freehand the round part of the letter, and then I use my ruler for the bottom part. Try to always use your ruler whenever you have a line that needs to be straight. And as usual, I'm using my finger to measure the width of my letters so that they are all consistent. I want all of my letters to be consistent in size. Now for my letter R, I want to make sure that it's nice and snug close to my Q. And I want to make sure also that it's consistent in size. So I measure it and I make a little mark. And then I'm using my finger to measure the width of my letter once again, so that my letters will be consistent in size. I'm starting with the straight bar part of the R. Then I'm going to make it so it almost looks like a letter P, and I want to make sure that that size is about the same as that Q. And I make a nice round P. And then for the inside of the P, once again I'm measuring using my finger, and I'm going to draw that inside of the P so that my sides are all consistent in size. I can erase the extra parts of my bar, and then I'm going to add the angled bar at the bottom of my P. I start right at that corner, use my finger to measure, and make it sure that I create a parallel line. Now we are going to draw perhaps one of the most difficult letters, the S. Now when you draw the letter S, you need to make sure that it is consistent in size once again. So you can see I'm using my pencil to measure the edges to make sure that my S top and bottom are about the same width. Now here I have the basic shape of my S. However, my S needs to be thick. So I need to use my finger once again to measure my S so that it will be a thick line. So here I start with the bottom, and then I'm going to use my finger to measure each section. And I'm going to have to adjust my lines a little bit as I go through this. Now you see here, this is where I need to make my adjustment in the middle of my S here. In order for that S to be nice and thick, I need to connect the edge to the line I just made. So I'm erasing that little middle part of the S so that I can get that consistent thickness. Now whenever I can use my ruler, I do. So I freehand drew the S, but those edges of the S, I need to use my ruler again. Now for the letter T, once again I need to make sure that it is a consistent size. But the letter T is fairly simple, as it's a horizontal bar and a vertical bar. So I'm creating my horizontal bar, and then I measure in the middle with my finger once again. Make sure it's centered on that horizontal bar, and now I make my vertical bar. Don't forget to use your ruler for any line that you possibly can. You have now created the fronts of each one of your letters. At this point, I like to erase that original box that I created so that I don't get confused later about which lines are which. So I erase that box that you used as your guideline for the size of your letters. Once that box has been erased, now we can move on to drawing the tops of our letters. And this is where we want to take each edge or corner of our letter and bring it back to that vanishing point. These are called orthogonal lines. Now, as you notice, with round letters, you're looking for the edge of that letter. With letters that have a corner, you're going to take that corner back to the vanishing point. I'm going to start with each of those edges and corners of my letter Q. Check each one. That one I'm not going to see because it's hidden by the letter. As soon as an orthogonal line hits a letter, you stop that line. Now with the R, we have a corner there, and then we're going to take it to the edge of the R on the other side. I'm going to draw all my orthogonal lines first, and then I'm going to start cutting them off from my letter. I'm checking each of these corners to make sure that I can't see them. This corner I can see, so I'm going to draw it back. But as soon as I hit the letter R, I stop that line. Once again, with my letter S, I'm going to take it to the curvy edge and draw my line from there. However, as soon as it hits the R there, I stop that line. Remember, your vanishing point might be in a different spot than mine is, so your letter might look different than mine. You need to follow this process of checking every edge and corner, because you might have different lines needed than mine. At this point, I'm going to draw a line, a horizontal line, and erase all the extra. This is my guideline for cutting off my letters. Now this is where it gets tricky. Whatever the front of the letter looks like, the back of the letter has to match. So now I have to start adjusting that back horizontal line to match the front, so it looks like one solid letter. So for the Q, we have a curvy front, so the back has to be curvy as well. You also need to check the width of the letter, the distance back. I measure it using my fingers, and then I need to match it with my ruler. Whatever the front looks like, the back needs to match. So the front here was a diagonal line, so the back of that little Q tail has to also be a diagonal line. The front of my R is straight with a little curve, so the back of my R needs to be straight with a little curve. Now this angled side of my R, I don't have to do anything to because it is the proper width. Now the top of my S here is a curved line, so the back of that top also needs to have a matching curved line. Erase any of those extras so that you don't get confused. Always use your fingers to measure that distance to make sure that you don't need to cut the letter off in any other places. For this S, I'm good to go. For my letter T, I don't need to do anything to the back of that because it matches. However, the side of my T is a vertical line. So I need to make sure the back of my T also has a vertical line. I use my ruler to line it up to the front to make sure that I have a parallel line. Here I also have to measure the distance back. In this case, I do have to cut off my letter T because the distance of the bottom is at this point is longer than the top. So I simply erase that little bit of extra and cut it off where it needs to be for the side of that T. You have now completed the letters Q, R, S, and T in one-point perspective.